John Baxter had a rather upsetting experience when he discovered a peculiar serpent in his restroom. This was just the beginning of a series of unwelcome revelations. "What on earth is that?" was John's initial reaction, resonating throughout the tiled confines of his bathroom. His gaze, full of astonishment, was fixed on the bizarre spectacle unfolding before him. A creature entirely out of context was leisurely winding itself in his toilet. His fundamental reaction was to flee, to put as much distance between himself and the animal as possible, but an unexplainable curiosity kept him there. John was a simple man living a tranquil life in the town of Maplewood, where extraordinary occurrences like serpents in restrooms were unheard of. On that day, a pleasant symphony of birdsong stirred him from slumber. It was a perfectly routine Tuesday, destined to be anything but ordinary. A pensioner, he had dedicated his time to influencing budding intellects as an English professor. His calm and serene life stood in stark contrast to the sensational stories that filled daily bulletins or the adrenaline-filled narratives of Hollywood films. Thus, the peculiar incident caught him completely off guard. Upon entering his pristine restroom, John was startled, feeling an irregularity in his heart rhythm. "What on earth is that?" he gasped, mesmerized as he looked at the toilet. Initially appearing as a snake, the creature writhed in the water. However, something about its lustrous skin and movement seemed unusual. Unable to identify what was off, John shuffled backward, enveloped by unease. He realized he needed someone more adept to handle the situation, and shakily took out his cell phone to dial for assistance. As he waited for someone to answer, he felt his subdued, routine life was on the brink of a drastic change. The expert, a wildlife rescuer named Sam, had helped John before with misdirected raccoons and wandering hedgehogs in his garden. Sam arrived promptly, parking his vehicle and walking toward John's house. "All right, let's check this thing out," he muttered confidently, leading the way to the bathroom. After a glance, Sam made eye contact with John and admitted, "This situation might be too difficult for us. Let me get more help. I assure you that I will clarify everything, but I request you to trust me," he added before stepping outside with his phone in hand, leaving John alone with his thoughts in a sea of queries. When Sam finally returned, his expression was tense. He slumped into an armchair, locking eyes with John. "I've been on the phone with an old acquaintance, a prior associate," Sam began, tension detectable in his voice. "He's a high-ranking government official, and he's sending someone over to help us comprehend what we're facing." As he waited for the government representative, John pondered how his outlook on life had altered. He found himself at the center of an enigma that felt like something out of a suspense-filled novel. Abruptly, a loud rap at the front door disrupted his thoughts. Sam rose to answer it, and John felt a twinge of trepidation as he peeked out to see a black sedan parked outside. A woman entered his lounge. Her presence filled the room with urgency as she introduced herself as Agent Thompson. She inspected the serpent in the bathroom, her reaction unreadable. "Gentlemen, we have something substantial on our hands," and she began, her gaze fixed firmly on John. "Excuse me, but I must attend to this call," she stated, stepping away hastily without awaiting John's approval, clutching her phone with urgency that stirred unease within him. Before he could fully process the circumstances, a group of men in dark suits invaded his personal space. Startled, John watched as they completely disregarded him, focusing instead on the bathroom, the source of the fuss. Their muted discussions were interrupted only by serious tones affirming John's inklings. This was a serious matter. One of the men turned to John. "Mr. Baxter," he stated, "I'm Agent Smith. We think what you've discovered is highly significant to us, and we appreciate your assistance." As nightfall enveloped Maplewood, the usual peaceful stillness of John's home was shattered. A wave of hustle and bustle followed as government officials flooded his living room, armed with various types of equipment, both recognizable and unrecognizable. All shared a slick, edgy look of cutting-edge technology. John's efforts to inquire about the situation fell on deaf ears. It was as if he were invisible. The officials were oblivious to his presence, and as time passed, he felt like an outsider in his own home. Whichever way he moved, he felt he was in their way. There were no answers offered, and whenever he dared to ask, his curiosity was met with disdain. As he gathered the courage to leave, Agent Smith walked authoritatively toward him. "Mr. Baxter, we need you to come with us now." Reluctantly, John allowed himself to be escorted outside and into an unmarked car. The journey ended with the abrupt stop of the engine. Agent Smith parked the car, and without a word, the remaining officials hurried ahead. John found himself alone, though his solitude was brief. Suddenly, the car door was jerked open. "Out!" a harsh voice ordered. John stepped out to find himself before an enormous structure with high-reaching ceilings and vast hallways. Eventually, they arrived at an immaculate office, centered around a substantial oval table. The lady gestured for him to take a seat. Not long after, one of the officials in his peripheral view reached into his bag. The lady's eyes glowed with businesslike curiosity that mirrored John's emotions. "Mr. Baxter," she initiated, her voice serious, "we've encountered something odd." "Unusual," John echoed, his heart pounding. "Indeed," she affirmed, nodding. "Your finding is quite extraordinary." Feeling a blend of expectation and unease, John leaned forward. "What is it then?" "Before we provide any information, you'll need to sign this," she declared, sliding paperwork and a pen across the table. "It's a secrecy agreement," she clarified, explaining that whatever they revealed would be confidential and not to be shared with anyone. With shaking hands, he picked up the pen, hurriedly flipped to the last page and signed. What could be so top secret? "Mr. Baxter," she broke through the silence, "it appears something more than an interesting creature from nature has crossed your path. You've encountered something not meant for ordinary people's control?" John held his breath, waiting for her next words. "We're handling a crucial matter here," she continued, holding John's gaze steady. She explained how the object in his restroom did not just randomly appear. It was an astonishing entity with no business being in such an everyday space. It belonged in the realm of myth and unfathomable events. John found himself absorbed in a sea of revelations about digestive processes, elusive food sources, and bizarre natural occurrences. He felt as though he had accidentally become the central character in a ludicrous book. By the time she wrapped up her explanation, the darkness had settled, and the uneventful suburban routine he cherished was thrown into disarray. His mind spun, overloaded with new information. Finally, the lady gestured for the room to be emptied. The officers who had invaded his home began packing their devices and disappeared into the night as suddenly as they had arrived. Agent Smith was assigned to bring John home, and before he knew it, he was alone in his living room. Days turned into weeks, and the peculiar incident faded from John's mind. Life returned to its regular pace, characterized by tranquility and simplicity. The only alteration was a bird feeder that curiously appeared in his yard. Watching the birds from his kitchen window made him smile. His life had returned to its easy, straightforward rhythm, as assured by the government officials. Yet every once in a while, when he saw something shimmering or heard a soft sound from the undergrowth, he was reminded of the brief turmoil that had disrupted his peaceful retirement. Nonetheless, John found solace in the welcoming sight of the birds and their pleasant chirping, a sign of the tranquility he had regained. From that moment on, he decided to rejoice in the simplicity of his existence, leaving enigmas and mysteries to the birds and their songs.